The Reserve Bank surprises everyone, lifting the official interest rate by 0.5%, the biggest jump in 20 years. The energy crisis worsens with business leaders calling for action, and Apple launches its own buy now, pay later product. It's Wednesday, the 8th of June, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Quite a day for people with mortgages, quite a day for pensioners who put money in the bank and live off the interest, quite a day for anyone that invests in bonds or shares or the Aussie dollar. Massive 24 hours it's been.
Oh, it's been an extraordinary day. And this is one of those days where often you can kind of get economic data and things that the significance of it is clear to anybody working in finance or working in kind of that economic space. When the Reserve Bank makes a decision like it did yesterday, everyone kind of understands, wow, this is big.
Yeah, it hits the back pocket for most of us. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why your conversation today with Gareth Aird from Commonwealth Bank about the rate hike decision is definitely worth sticking around for after the show.
Yep, absolutely.
And of course, that is the main story this morning. The Reserve Bank of Australia surprised, well, pretty much everyone, really, lifting the official cash rate by 50 basis points. It is, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest jump since February 2000 and the first back-to-back rate increase in 12 years. Records falling everywhere, Sean.
It sure did. The official cash rate is now 0.85%, and Governor Philip Lowe said the big jump was needed because of the resilience of the local economy and growing inflation from spiking energy prices. He said supply chain disruptions and Russia's invasion in Ukraine were the main contributors, but so too were capacity constraints in the local economy and the 5-decade low unemployment rate of 3.9%. Basically, the inflation situation looks much, much worse today than it did a month ago, according to the Reserve Bank. And inflation is expected to rise even more before settling down again next year. Now, having said all that, much of the pressure is because the economy is actually performing pretty well. Dr. Lowe said households and businesses weren't carrying too much debt. An upswing in business investment is underway, and there's a large pipeline of construction work to be completed. A big unknown is how the cost of living pressure is going to hit households. Also, the global outlook remains clouded by the war in Ukraine and its effect on prices, particularly for energy and agricultural commodities. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers was less upbeat than the Reserve Bank, saying Australia faced a combination of challenges: high and rising inflation, rising interest rates, and falling real wages at a time when the budget is heavily indebted.
All right, so one of the big questions out of yesterday, and it's probably the one that a lot of people are asking at the moment, is what does this mean then for mortgage repayments?
Well, it's fair to assume the big lenders will increase mortgage and business lending rates by at least 0.5%, the equivalent of the 50 basis point increase in the official rate yesterday. For someone with a $500,000 mortgage and 25 years remaining, repayments will rise by about $133 a month, taking the increase in the past couple of months to nearly $200. If you have a loan of $1 million, you're basically paying nearly $400 extra in monthly repayments following yesterday's hike and the hike a month ago. $400 extra, that's $100 a week. If you're paying much more for fuel, you're paying much more for electricity, these costs are really starting to hit home.
Yeah, they certainly add up pretty quickly. And then the next question is, should we be expecting more? Are there more rate hikes to come?
Well, the Reserve Bank made it clear that there's more to come as what it says normalises monetary policy. Remember, we are coming off record low interest rates, and a cash rate of 0.85% is still very, very low. It's just that we've gotten used to these types of rates. But the reality is the official rate is heading back towards 1.5%, 2%, perhaps 2.5% over the next 12 months or so, according to market economists.
Sean, there was a big reaction in local markets yesterday.
Yes, the announcement triggered a big sell-off in the S&P ASX 200 on fears that the central bank will slow the economy too much. By the end of trading, the bourse was down 1.5% to 7,096 points. It was a very broad-based sell-off with around 80% of stocks ending the day lower. Now, some sectors, like the big banks, normally do better when interest rates rise because they can expand their profit margins. Not yesterday. They were hammered. National Australia Bank finished more than 3% lower. Commonwealth Bank was down 2.6%. Westpac was off more than 2%. Macquarie Group fell 3%. And Wesfarmers, not a bank, but a big retailer and chemicals group, it was off nearly 4%. The worst performing sector overall was technology, led by WiseTech Global, which dropped more than 5%. Both Xero and REA Group were off more than 4%. The real estate sector, which is particularly sensitive to interest rates, also performed poorly, with market leader Goodman Group down 4%. In the bond market, yields jumped sharply, with 3-year bond yields now at 3.16%. What that means is if you're investing in bonds, which many pensioners do, you're getting a better return. So that's good news.
And lastly, Sean, what about international markets?
Well, we include the Aussie dollar in international markets, and it jumped sharply following the move by the Reserve Bank. Short-term moves in currencies are very linked to interest rates. Also supporting the Aussie dollar at the moment are commodity prices. Now, they hit a new record yesterday morning with the Bloomberg Commodity Spot Index jumping 2%. That index tracks 23 raw materials, and gas and wheat are leading it higher. It's actually up 36% this year. So, between commodities and the surprise lift in interest rates, the Aussie dollar did really well. Just before we leave currencies, the Japanese yen has hit a 20-year low against the US dollar. It's the exact opposite of the Aussie dollar. The Bank of Japan is sticking with ultra-low interest rates, so no one wants a yen.
All right, big start. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese continued his trip in Indonesia yesterday, visiting Makassar, which is a financial centre in the country.
That's right. It's the largest city in eastern Indonesia, and Mr. Albanese was at pains to say that Australia knew Indonesia was much more than Jakarta and Bali. Is it? There you go. He wants much greater investment by Australia into our northern neighbour. At the moment, Indonesia ranks just 13th on the list of countries Australia invests in. The Prime Minister wants that ranking to rise. Certainly, Michael, this trip seems to be ticking all the right boxes.
Sean, there was a little bit of homework from yesterday's show when you asked about the Prime Minister on the bike ride with the Indonesian president, and you asked whether they had their pants tucked into their socks.
Oh, Michael.
And I thought that you were just joking. I zoomed in on the pictures and had a bit of a closer look. And yes, I can confirm 100% that Anthony Albanese tucked his suit pants leg into his socks. It is the most Australian look ever.
It is. He had RM Williams on too, didn't he? So he had RMs on, the pants tucked into the socks, getting on the push bike. Great photo.
It was fantastic, wasn't it? And Sean, on a much, much more serious note, in the background to all of this is the Australia-China relationship. Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles yesterday hinted that the government would like some sort of high-level dialogue.
Yes, he headed off yesterday to Singapore for a defence summit. He said while a request for a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the summit with China hadn't been received, Australia certainly remains open to discussion. A spokesperson then said Australia would welcome the opportunity to resume ministerial dialogue with China. Now, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi told state media that Beijing would continue an open attitude and carry out more trilateral and quadrilateral cooperation with Australia and New Zealand in the Pacific. Baby steps, but we're heading in the right direction at least.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And speaking of New Zealand, Sean, the Prime Minister there, Jacinda Ardern, said that she'd meet Anthony Albanese later this week.
He's very busy, isn't he?
Yeah, sure is.
He's meeting all the global leaders. Ms. Ardern and Mr. Albanese will discuss topics including climate change, the Indo-Pacific Forum, AUKUS, and the upcoming Pacific Island Forum. So from my count, he's now met 5 global leaders in about his first 3 weeks.
That is pretty extraordinary. That is setting a cracking pace.
Sure is.
All right, moving away from politics now, and the energy debate continues. Origin Energy Chief Executive Frank Calabria yesterday said that Australia is not developing new zero-emission generation quickly enough to compensate for the closure of the country's ageing fossil fuel generation.
That's right. And the bosses of Wesfarmers and Commonwealth Bank both said they're worried about the impact of higher energy prices on household spending. Wesfarmers boss Rob Scott said it was a difficult time in terms of inflation and high gas prices, and there's no easy fix for households. Commonwealth Bank's Matt Comyn said working out an effective way to deliver low-cost energy is important at both a consumer and business level, but he added there are no silver bullets. And then late yesterday, a coalition of peak industry bodies, including the Australian Industry Group, the Australian Council of Social Services, the Clean Energy Council and the National Farmers Federation, called for long-term measures to deal with the crisis.
And Sean, the comments came after Resources Minister Madeleine King called on the power companies to do more to get more power stations online.
That's right. Around 30% of the energy capacity in the country is currently offline for various reasons. Ms. King also said the introduction of a requirement for gas producers to reserve 15% of available gas for domestic use, as has been recommended, would be hard to implement. Now, the federal and state governments are meeting today to discuss, or at least try and find some sort of solution to the energy crisis.
And Sean, some of the biggest overseas energy investors are also commenting on the situation. These are big international names.
Yeah, they sure are. Look, a conference held in Sydney yesterday included the local leaders of ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Japan's Inpex Corporation. The three speakers all agreed a stable regulatory environment is needed for the sector. It's such a costly sector to invest in, and you need stability for people to make those investment decisions.
All right. Now, the value, Sean, of private equity-backed mergers and acquisition involving local companies hit a record $40 billion in the first 5 months of the year. Would you describe that as a deal frenzy?
I think so. I think we can go deal frenzy.
Yes.
Yeah, good. A report by Refinitiv says 61 deals, thereby a deal frenzy, from private equity firms targeted Australian companies. The biggest was the $30 billion bid for Ramsay Healthcare by a consortium led by US group KKR. It just shows that there's plenty of M&A activity around, but also that investors are putting money with private equity firms more than ever before. According to Financial Review, private equity firms now have more money to invest than ever.
Now, I love this next story, Sean. It's great, perhaps, if you've been trying to sell a second-hand car. Not so if you've been trying to buy one, because used car prices have jumped 18% over the past year as demand rises, and it's really because of the backlog in the new car market.
That's right, though the size of increases have started to level out, according to Moody's Analytics Used Vehicle Index. Since the start of the pandemic in early 2020, used car prices are up 79%. Amazing. If you include trucks, it's actually 81%. Now, the initial jump in prices occurred as people avoided public transport and took road trips because they couldn't fly. The more recent second jump has occurred because people can't get their hands on new cars.
A few quick short stories, Sean. Counting in last month's election continues, with the AEC saying the increase in postal ballots means counting is taking longer.
Yes, the Electoral Commission said that many seats won't actually be formally declared for a couple of weeks yet, Michael. Also, mining services group Perenti said it will buy back 10% of its shares because it believes it's undervalued. And GQG Partners said funds under management grew nearly 5% to $95 billion last month.
And Sean, just before we finish up the local news, I actually had to check to make sure that this wasn't the 1st of April, because there is apparently a crisis in the world of fast food, with KFC now putting cabbage rather than lettuce in its burgers.
Well, yes, more strictly, KFC said it's going to use a blend of cabbage and lettuce, according to Bloomberg. Supply chain disruptions are a problem. Then the floods down the East Coast wiped out much of the lettuce crop. And iceberg lettuce is now selling for up to $12 a pop. Incredible.
Wow.
And of course, other prices are soaring. Things like watermelons. A whole watermelon in one of the big supermarkets is trading at about $25, for example. Anyway, KFC have decided to do something about it. And in a throwback to the poor days in Ireland or somewhere like that, they're putting cabbage into their burgers.
I suppose it says something about how tasteless cabbage is that you could just
No one will
substitute it. No one will actually realise. It kind of looks the same. All right. Moving on to overseas news, Sean. Apple has held its annual Worldwide Developer Conference, unveiling a new computer chip, updated laptops, and its own buy now, pay later service.
That's right. The new chip called M2 is 8% faster and even better on graphics. The MacBook Air design has been given an overhaul. There's going to be biometric pass keys, and iPhones will eventually be able to be used as webcams. But Michael, the announcement, which will catch most people's attention, well, at least the non-computer crowd's attention, is Apple Pay Later. It's a buy now, pay later product. Initially, it will be limited to the US, and it will allow users of Apple Pay to purchase goods in 4 installments over 3 weeks with no interest or fees. It's a direct competitor to some of the global leaders, Afterpay, Klarna, and Commonwealth Bank StepPay here in Australia, as well as Zip. But Apple is getting into the buy now, pay later business.
Sean, the other thing that grabbed me from the Apple conference is the big update that they're making to the operating system for phones that will allow you to undo sending a text message if you've made a mistake, which could see the end of very entertaining autocorrect text messages.
That's true, but it's going to be a very well-used functionality, I reckon.
I suspect so. Now, we talked yesterday about UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I don't know whether this is really a big win, but he can claim that at least 3/5 of his Conservative parliamentary colleagues like him after winning a vote of no confidence in Parliament.
That's right. In fact, it's 59%, so it's not quite 3/5. So we won't even say it's least. It's just about 3/5. He's definitely a Teflon man, Boris Johnson, though the Partygate affair, whereby he held and hosted parties at 10 Downing Street during COVID lockdowns, certainly hasn't gone away. Now, his critics can't call another no confidence vote for a year. That gives him some breathing space. Mr. Johnson said he now wants to put the issue behind him and focus on the cost of living, the war in Ukraine, and getting the UK economy flowing again. I just don't think the public and the media are going to let him do it.
I think you might be right there. It's the kind of thing that's not really easy to move beyond, is it?
No, definitely not.
All right, it is another good day because we get to talk about Elon Musk, and the battle for Twitter continues. Elon Musk says he believes the group is breaching their merger agreements by not meeting his demands for information about spam and fake accounts.
Yes, he said Twitter is actively resisting and thwarting his information rights by not disclosing the information on fake accounts. Now, last month, Musk said he wouldn't proceed with his $44 billion takeover unless the social media group could prove that bots make up fewer than 5% of its users, as the company has stated. Musk himself estimates they make up about 20%. Now, it's hard to know whether this is just a ploy to lower the price, whether it's a ploy for him to not actually make the bid. It's just very difficult to know where this one's going to land.
But in the meantime, we can keep talking about it.
That's right.
Up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and today you're speaking with Gareth Aird, the head of Australian Economics at Commonwealth Bank.
That's right. He was very busy because he really had to rethink his forecast in light of the big jump from the Reserve Bank yesterday afternoon. It took everyone by surprise, and there are a lot of economists at the moment reworking what they think will happen, and we asked Gareth all about that.
Yeah, that's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 8th of June, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and have a go at listening to us as well through your smart speaker. Just say, play the Fear and Greed podcast, and away you go. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.